Kia ora and welcome. I'm really delighted to introduce two amazing researchers today. Dr. Gwen Grellet is a researcher at Manaki Whenua Landcare Research. She's got an extensive record in the genetics, diversity and ecology of plant beneficial fungi and how these interact not only with plants but also with a multitude of organisms living in the soils of natural and agricultural landscapes. Over the years, she's worked with many prestigious research organisations throughout the world, but her research is now primarily focused on New Zealand and Australian agro-ecosystems. She's looking at practices and pathways for on-farm innovation and landscape management, such as regenerative agriculture. She works collaboratively with scientists, farmers, government organisations and industry leaders. Joining Gwen is Sam Lang. Sam is a former Hill Country farmer, farm systems researcher, and manager of the Quorum Sense farming network. He undertook a study of international regenerative farming practices as part of a 2016 Nuffield Scholarship, and has since integrated regenerative farming and research through a number of projects and collaborations. I'll hand right over to Sam and the team to get the presentation underway, and we'll be back to join you for some questions and answers at the end. Over to you, Gwen.
Kia ora, Christine. Thank you very much for this introduction. Just checking that you can all see our slide. Yes? Yeah, perfect. Kia ora koutou. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's a privilege to actually be presenting with Sam as well. And we're going to dive right into talking to you about the work we've been doing about regenerative agriculture. We've organized a talk in two parts. We'll first give you some highlight about what is really regenerative agriculture, with specific emphasis on New Zealand. And we'll also highlight the initiative that we are currently leading to build the scientific evidence about regenerative agriculture in New Zealand. So I'll dive right in, and this is the $1 million question. What the bleep is regenerative agriculture? Everybody wants to have a definition, and the regenerative community is really resisting having the definition, because the minute something is defined, it's very difficult to have it being adaptive and progress and evolve with alignment with the changes in the environment. However, we need to know what we're talking about. Here, a lot of the momentum I've been building and diffusing worldwide, led by the US and especially the USDA. There's a entity, the Soil Health Coalition, which is a leading entity in regenerative agriculture. Basically, regenerative agriculture is adopting the 5 principles of soil health. So keep the soil covered at all times. So when there's residue, leave them on the soil surface, never have bare ground, limit disturbance, minimum tillage or even eliminate tillage, have living roots all year round. So there's always an input of carbon into the ground and maximize the probability of having photosynthesis ongoing throughout the year. Increase diversity, so move away from a monoculture system. And then regardless of the cash crop, integrate livestock into the agroecosystem. Recently, the Soil Health Academy has also proposed a few more concepts. The first concept is know your context, and that's recognizing that every farm is different. And so regenerative agriculture is really promoting moving away from having a one-size-fits-all. They're also emphasizing the fact that a farm is a complex adaptive system. Managing a farm is in a sense stewardship of this adaptive system and the need to take into account feedback from the practice applied to how the system is behaving. And I'll now hand it over to Sam to focus more on New Zealand.
Cool, thanks, Gwen. So when it comes to New Zealand, there's a pretty broad consensus among farmers and the wider sector that we need to adapt these regenerative principles to our own New Zealand context. For this project, we've come up just with a placeholder description of regenerative agriculture that kind of captures the essence of the soil health principles that Gwen just showed, and that's captured in the first half of this placeholder here. But it also identifies ideas around encouraging a mindset of continuous improvement and the idea that everything is connected. So it's kind of piecing together a bit of the established descriptive level stuff from overseas, and also capturing some of the conversations and ideas that are emerging in the regenerative community in New Zealand. Next slide, please, Gwen. So what do regenerative approaches in New Zealand actually look like? Ultimately, this is the foundation of our research work, so I'm just going to whip through a very high-level summary in a few minutes. Here we have a best practice no-till arable farm. The left picture shows residue retention to keep the soil covered while crops are establishing. So again, sort of best practice no-till there. But the right-hand side photo shows a diverse cover crop sown between the cash crops to increase both above and below ground diversity, with the goal of improving soil health and productivity. This farm is also progressively eliminating most agri-chemicals from his system, but keeping them up his sleeve in case he needs them to save a crop. Next slide, please, Gwen. We also have, there are also other ways to try and increase that above and below ground diversity. And here you've got some examples of the use of companion species alongside cash crops. So here we've got wheat and oats with 2 or 3 different companions sown alongside those crops. And they perform a number of roles, including pest and disease suppression, improving pollination, improving soil structure, cycling different nutrients, and providing soil cover, for example. Again, very light touch. There's a whole lot of other things going on there, but just to give you a snapshot. On the next slide, you'll see similar approaches being used in a viticulture context. Again, the use of highly diverse cover crops between the rows in a vineyard to improve soil structure, nutrient cycling, support pollination, help with pest and disease control. And this farm is also using a very targeted foliar nutrition program to try and support plant health at key stages, and also looking at using specific biocontrols as well to control key pests. So it's a system and it's a set of practices being combined to try and achieve something in that context. The next slide shows a couple of photos from a diverse pastures on a dairy platform, and the one on the left-hand side being grazed at much higher covers than you'd typically expect or you'd traditionally see on dairy farms in New Zealand. Overall, this farmer is trying to improve the health and function of his soils and pastures in a way that translates into improved animal health and performance with less cost and less environmental risks. So employing a range of different practices that improve biological nutrient cycling, promote deeper rooting pastures, increase water infiltration, water holding capacities, and overall sort of create more resilience in the system with less dependencies from outside. The next slide shows a couple of innovative wintering strategies being developed, again, to try and maximise animal health and minimise environmental risks during the winter period. On the left-hand side, you've got an example of winter bale grazing there, where farmers effectively put out hay bales across large parts of their platforms before winter sets in, and effectively strip graze those throughout the winter, so that the animals are getting a mix of hay and fresh pasture every day. And on the right-hand side is an example of taking the winter cropping idea, but increasing the diversity of species sown in that winter crop. So you've got a mix of annuals and perennials sown in the outset, and some of those species are there to feed the animals, some of them are there to feed and protect the soil, and some of them are there with a focus on growing back once the crop's been grazed, so that it's soaking up all its nutrients, keeping the soil covered during winter, and providing valuable spring or late winter and early spring feed for the farmers. And finally, in terms of sheep and beef systems, this farm pictured here now just runs 2 mixed mobs almost year round on diverse pastures with an increasing stocking rate over time, pretty high animal performance and very low inputs. The biggest single cost at the moment is the multi-species winter crops, similar to the previous slide, and this farm is trying to move away from them over time. I suppose in every farm system that we're talking about, and particularly in sheep and beef, where you're looking at rolling hill country versus steep hill country, they're very different contexts. So the approaches that farmers are using are vary significantly depending on those contexts. However, the primary focus is usually on grazing management as the key to support high animal health and performance, while also improving soil health, nutrient cycling, pasture quality, etc. These systems really seem to come into their own in dry summers or challenging winters, where farmers are able to and aiming to grow more grass that maintains sufficient quality to keep their stock in good condition through those challenging periods, and manage them in a way that that supports their recovery once the favourable weather comes in. So the last slide here is just an example of some of the kind of intensive subdivision that farmers might use. This is in a steeper hill country situation, and management like this kind of supports the ability of farmers to run those kind of higher covers while also maintaining high animal performance. So very quick high level overview. I hope that's semi-coherent, and I'll hand back to Gwen to step into the science.
Yes, thank you so much, Sam. So the first thing we would like to talk to you about is the pilot study that we've been conducting on pastoral farms in the south of New Zealand. And this is our first go at actually acquiring data on regenerative agriculture in New Zealand. So the study is a small scale study. It was just really to test our approach. It's based in Otago and Southland. The goal really was to test various indicators. What we're really aiming for is finding indicators that can be deployed throughout the country. So they have to be affordable, they have to be reliable, and if possible, it would be great to find indicators that indicate a whole ecosystem trend. And we also wanted to acquire some baseline on various indicators that we've tested, and see if our experimental approach was suited to the question. So the approach we've chosen to test is taking a pairwise comparison. So our replication unit is a pair of farms. So we've reached out to the regenerative community and selected 6 prominent regenerative farmers that consider themselves being regenerative, and also have mana in their community, are acting as leaders, as innovators. And then we've also reached out to some of their neighbors that deploy current best practice, so really good management of their farm too. And so what we're doing is we are looking at the whole farm level for some of the metrics, and some other metrics, especially soil health. We are taking a plot-based approach. So we have 3 paddocks. In each of these paddocks, we have one 20 by 20 meter plot. And each of these plots are paired across the 2 neighboring farms using same soil type and topography, and those plots are less than 200 meters apart, so they have the same ecoclimate. So in theory, they're extremely comparable. So basically, an overview of that very small scale study is that we have 3 pairs of sheep and beef, and we have 3 pairs of dairy farm. The metrics that we focused on are soil carbon and nitrogen stock, and that was to specifically test whether carbon can be increased and whether nitrogen stock can be kept at reasonable level despite reducing nitrogen addition. We've also looked at soil aggregate to understand whether the soil can still hold, how the soil holds compared to when you have rainfall event or drought. Water infiltration holding capacity, and of course fertility, soil micronutrient and micronutrient and different carbon pools, and forage diversity and quality. And then we've done some visual soil assessment of the health of the soil. And we've also looked at the diversity of the invertebrate below ground and above ground, and that was specifically to test whether those could be suitable indicators for whole ecosystem function. So so some data. So what we've observed with our small sampling size is that we can't detect a significant increase in the carbon stock. Although as you can see here, there is a trend here, but now our our number of replicates is far too low. And there is no indication from our data that limiting substantially the input of nitrogen will reduce nitrogen stock in the system. And this is in the soil profile down to 60 centimeters. In terms of soil health, so using the VSA developed by our colleague Grant Shepherd, the visual soil assessments that some scientists are using and also farmers, there's a clear improvement in the soil health overall for the regeneratively managed farm. Right, in terms of soil structure, we observed a trend increase in the size of the aggregate. So the bigger the aggregate, the better the soil will hold together in a climate of flood, for example, or a cycle of extreme rainfall and then drought. And what's really important is we've observed across all farms that if you the size of the aggregate will really affect or is correlated with the amount of carbon that is stored in the soil. And so if we have a greater number of very small aggregates, so they are the ones that can be lost very easily through erosion, then we in those farms comparatively have less carbon stock stored in below ground. In terms of above ground biodiversity, if we increase the correlation, there's a strong correlation between the diversity at plant level and the number of morphospecies recognized for the insects. So that's our above ground invertebrate diversity. And overall, our regenerative farms had a greater number of insects on their farm. Now looking below ground, so we've focused on earthworms and nematodes. Nematodes are very, very small little worm-like organisms that are really been shown by multiple studies as being indicative of how is the energy moving in our system in the soil in between all the different biogeochemical cycles. So we see that with regenerative management, we have an increase in nematode number. We also tested for the fungal to bacterial ratio, which is how many nematode-eating fungi are there compared to how many nematode-eating bacteria. And that's an indicative of the energy channel and how are the resources used. And we were testing the hypothesis that under regenerative management, we might have an increase in fungal to bacterial ratio, and our data didn't show a significant increase. Remember this small number of replicates. But what we are seeing is that across all farms, if you the increase in nematode really is correlated with an increase in carbon stock, and the increase in number of earthworms is also correlated with a decrease in compaction. So our data really makes sense. So all the results, including the whole farm assessment, are expected to be completed, and the analysis is supposed to be completed at the end of December. But what I really want to emphasize here is that we set out designing this experiment looking at a black and white situation. Are farm regenerative, or are they using best practice as a contrast? Our data clearly show that this is a range, this is a gradient. So although the experimental design we adopted is powerful, it is not sufficient to answer the question that we want to ask. More suited would be an experimental design that allows to really tease apart all these different relationships between the different part of the system, and how promoting management that emphasize one relationship versus another might lead to outcome at the whole ecosystem level. Right. So the other initiative that Sam and I are leading is a think piece that we've just started at the beginning of June, which is running for 6 months, highly collaborative, and expected to be finished at the end of November. I will now hand over to Sam.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so Gwen, myself, and many others have been working on various science proposals and projects for 2 to 3 years now. All related to regenerative ag, and all based off a participatory approach that brings together multiple knowledge systems and perspectives. We were looking into options for developing a large research proposal to look at regenerative agriculture in New Zealand, both from a descriptive evidence gathering perspective and also from a fundamental research perspective, so how and why things are working in the way they are. And the idea was suggested that we do a small think piece project on regenerative agriculture that could act as a bit of a runway project for this much bigger research proposal. And so this is what we're going to talk about now, which has been co-funded by the Land and Water National Science Challenge and the Next Foundation. And our collaborators, if Glenn, you click to the next slide, please. This just shows there has been a rapidly increasing interest in regenerative ag in the last few months, and that's translated into really high engagement with this project so far. It's growing into a really diverse and active collaboration with lots of in-kind support. This slide shows many of our collaborators, but not all of them, and that's growing all the time, which is really exciting. And if we go to the next slide, you will see the overarching goal of this project, which is to develop a research framework that can be used to develop a scientific evidence base and to develop research questions specific to regenerative agriculture in New Zealand. So that's our North Star there. And to do that, we've organised the project into 4 parts that we'll step through quickly. The first part is canvassing a cross-section of our agri-food system using small online focus groups to ask a wide diversity of stakeholders what questions they have about regenerative agriculture in New Zealand. The insights from this exercise will help us guide and prioritise the subsequent parts of the project. And so we're about 2/3 of the way through that exercise at the moment, and some of the conversations have been really interesting. The second part, or another part of the project, is to run an exercise that captures the top principles for regenerative farming specific to New Zealand. Naturally, farmers are going to be really important contributors to this exercise, and as part of it, we'll be exploring whether the principles or goals that farmers have differ across the country, either by region or by sector. And I'll hand back to Gwen to describe the last 2 parts.
Yeah, so we've started this process currently for the viticulture sector, and the idea there is at the end of the day, we want to be able to offer some ideas on how research could be conducted on the ground, or any monitoring or assessment of outcome from farming system across the nation. So what we really want to find out is what are the outcomes that people value from their farm. We have a list of outcome area that we want to address, but we're also teasing out with talking with the various sectors what are the outcomes that really matters for them. So the aim of the thinking piece is to set up some level of priority. What are the priority outcomes that we're looking for, and how would we go about measuring those? And in terms of measuring, so here you see this basically the word indicators. What we want to do here is to acknowledge that there are indicators that can be very precise, that academics like myself really pay attention to and value. There are also ways of measuring outcomes that are maybe less accurate, but they are much more scalable and cheaper, so they can be suitable for a large-scale research or assessment program. There are indicators that are still in a research and development stage. There's also indicators that are observational that farmers use, and we usually don't include them in our research efforts because they are user specific. However, they are the indicators that the farmers use to make decisions on a day-to-day basis, and so they hang their livelihood on these indicators. So we are taking the approach that they also have some merit and some value to contribute. And then finally, our 4th part is to acknowledge the linkages between our project and iwi-led initiative that draw upon Kopapa Māori knowledge system. And this is because we are aware that there are some very strong initiatives led elsewhere that are really framed and anchored in Kopapa Māori. And so what we're doing is keeping the door open and making sure we are having this conversation, but not actually attempting to include Kopapa Māori in our work, because this is not our place to do so. And it's already done very, very well elsewhere. Finally, we are going to close, and we just really want to thank, we are the 2-figure front, but this is really a huge teamwork exercise, especially the pilot project was actually quite a huge undertaking. I want to thank my colleagues, particularly Kate Owen, Paul Mitchell, Nina Cole, and Norman Mason for the stats, and Cara Allen, and a whole bunch of other people, including students that came from overseas and from the North Island. I want to acknowledge the Coron Sense team, and of course Manaki Whenua for its ongoing support. And where to from there? So we've given you a small snapshot of the main initiative that we're leading. There's others on the side as well. What we are really trying to do is build a picture, whatever we are doing, that has to be relevant for what's going on the ground. Regenerative agriculture is farmer-led. It's a grassroots movement. So I've personally have walked a journey in the last 3 years where I've really invested a lot of time and effort understanding and to be able to understand what the farmers are doing. And it is in our opinion, any research that will be done on regenerative agriculture or any decision that has to be taken by in terms of regulatory body or policies needs to be acknowledging that the farmers are leading in the innovation, and so there needs to be a lot of conversation with them. So we want to really merge science, policy, and on the ground innovation. And the message we want to give is a message of hope. We think that there is an amazing opportunity for New Zealand right now with the current climate, global trade, economic, social context. And there's an amazing opportunity for New Zealand to step up and embrace a change in the way we manage our productive landscape. And with this, thank you very much. And I think we pretty much run out of time. Thank you, Christine. Over to you now.
Gwen and Sam, thank you very much. That was fantastic. I think we've got time for just one question, but I just want to reassure everybody that has taken the time to put a question into the system here. We will address those questions and we will come back to you with them, and they will also be published on our website alongside the recording and slides for this webinar. So there will be more time for more discussion, and we will come back to everyone who has asked a question. But one of the ones that's come up a couple of times from the small study in the South Island, how long were each of those farms managed under their conventional and under their regenerative practice? Gwen, can you answer that one for us?
So we had a range. So the shortest amount of time, the farm that transitioned for the shortest amount of time to regenerative management is for 3 years, and most of them exceeded 5 to 10 years starting to manage the farm under regenerative management. All the farm, because this is a pastoral system, none of the farm had renewed their pastures on the location that we sampled. The latest, for at least they were there for 10 years. If that answered the question. So there was no upgrading of the ground. Yeah.
We're right on time. We will come back to, look, I can see all these fantastic questions. So it's really helpful for us to have those questions coming in. So thank you very much. We will come back. There will be a chance to engage again with Gwen and Sam through as we put this information out there. You will receive an email from us shortly with a copy of the recording, and Sam and Gwen's email addresses will be there as well if you want to connect with them directly. In terms of our LINKOnline seminar series, we'll be back in 2 weeks, and we're talking about New Zealand's worst weed. So you've got 2 weeks to figure out what that might be, and all will be revealed when the invitation hits your inbox before too long. So I'd like to say thank you very much and ask Tiffany to close our session.